Hello, and a warm welcome back to Autism Unpacked. I'm Rosie Moss, and today we're going to be talking about a subject that affects many families. We're going to be talking about maths. Maths is everywhere in our lives, and yet for lots of young people, it can bring worry, stress, or even a sudden urge to run in the opposite direction. And for autistic children in particular, the way maths is taught or experienced can make a huge difference to how safe and confident they feel. To help us unpack all of this, I'm joined by James Birchenough, Educational Quality Advisor for Maths at Options Autism. James began his career as a primary teacher. He later led an alternative provision and now works across many Options Autism schools, supporting staff to make maths hands-on, practical and meaningful. He's delivered training across the group, visited countless classrooms, and has a particular passion for helping children and the adults that support them develop a healthy relationship with maths. James, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. Now, before we get into the detail, what drew you to this particular area of education and supporting young people?
Well, it's funny because I've always had a passion for supporting those young people that need a bit of extra support, whether it be with special educational needs and disabilities, or whether it be through trauma or behaviour, or all sorts of those things kind of mashed together. But I guess, obviously, as my career has progressed, I've moved towards maths, and that was kind of by accident, really. I didn't intend to specialise in maths, but I really enjoyed, over the last couple of years in this role, being able to delve deeper into the subject and, appreciate the importance that it has to real life. And also the challenges within it. It's a really important subject, but obviously many people can find maths anxiety-inducing and quite difficult. So, yeah, I'm really enjoying in this role, supporting people with that and helping remove some of those barriers where I can.
And I bet it's actually incredibly rewarding because maths, as we know, is a fundamental part of life. We cannot avoid it. Mm-hmm. We need it in everyday life. So it is important that all children are able to access some degree of learning around maths.
Identifying the struggles and how to help. Both children and parents can struggle when it comes to maths. As we hear now, the challenges can be different, whether it's difficulties with certain topics in the subject, dyscalculia, or maths anxiety.
Many families listening might be thinking, my child, or even myself, and I speak from personal experience, really struggle with maths. Find it kind of brings out real anxiety, stress and worry. If I was to do a survey of young people and say, do you like maths? I probably wouldn't get 100% hit rate, would I? So how do you know if a child is struggling with maths because they don't like it, because they find it really challenging, because they have something called dyscalculia, which I'm going to go into in a moment, or because they are struggling from maths anxiety?
It can be hard to tell sometimes, and obviously it's quite common in our culture to say, oh, I don't like maths, I'm not good at maths. So it's quite prevalent among adults and among young people as well. I think for dyscalculia and maths anxiety, there's some specific things which are kind of at play there. So in maths anxiety, that kind of fight or flight or freeze response comes into play a lot. Just the thought of doing maths problems or maths calculations, whether it be in a classroom or in everyday life, can just provoke that sense of helplessness, that sense of panic, to the extent that you can't really, compute it in your brain. You can't really think about the maths that you're trying to do. And in terms of dyscalculia, it's more about that kind of difficulties with numerical magnitude processing. So in terms of you can't comprehend so well the quantities of stuff, whether it be seeing the numbers or whether it be seeing the kind of a pictorial representation of it. So that's quite specific. So yeah, both are quite different really to simply finding maths a bit tricky.
Yeah. And when you describe that kind of fight or flight response, when you put it like that's a real visceral physical response. And if you are suffering from anxiety in any area of your life, one of the main things is your mind will go completely blank. So how can we introduce children who have a real anxiety around maths? How can we make it seem less scary and less challenging for them?
Yeah, any ways you can take the pressure off, I think, can really help. So sometimes maths anxiety can kind of stem from kind of that fear of getting it wrong in public. Mm-hmm. And so often teachers do call on children to share their answers publicly, where obviously that might be quite triggering for some young people. So removing that pressure or reducing the pressure as much as possible, perhaps giving them a chance to talk about it with a partner first before sharing in front of everybody, or simply answering on mini whiteboards, or answering by manipulating some resources rather than talking verbally out loud. That kind of thing can really help.
And I'm also thinking as well, for a lot of autistic young people, there is a very much, what is the point? Why will I need this? So is there an argument that you kind of make maths more real life so that these young people can see how they will need it? Because I'm thinking if you give them an algebra question, for a lot of people, that you can't see how that will translate into being a useful skill. But of course, if you go into the shop, you need to be able to count your change. So with things like taking them to the shop with cash, be it one possibility of teaching them some basic monetary and finance skills.
Yeah, I think that's a brilliant idea. And I think sometimes it's about building up to that end point as well. So you might not take your child straight to the shop and straight to a real life situation. You might build up to it slowly. You might, practice with real coins at home in a kind of role play type, situation
or something
exactly
like that, yeah.
That's really nice to do that kind of thing, and then you build up slowly to taking them to a real shop, and obviously then at home you can kind of pause the conversation, you have more time to work it out, whereas obviously in a real situation, there might be someone behind you in the queue, you've got that time pressure, but yeah, as long as there's that time to prepare for it in advance, and that's a lovely idea, yeah.
And that again makes sense because, if you're in a shop and let's say somebody's behind you, there's another pressure that's going to add a layer of anxiety. But if you do the practicing at home, that builds up the confidence and the strengths.
Yeah, and any kind of way in which maths can be linked to that young person's interests as well. So my children really like Minecraft, for example.
Oh, yes.
And there's so much maths that you can do in Minecraft,
Yes.
isn't there? You're building a house that has to fit in a specific space. How many blocks do you need to go across? How many blocks do you need to go the other way? And then automatically you're then working out perimeter. You're thinking about area. And then when you are building the walls higher to make the rest of your house, you're thinking about the kind of volume and capacity type stuff. So there's lots of maths that can come into play. Not that you necessarily have to draw out every single maths link when you play in Minecraft with your child, but just it can come into conversation if you want it to.
And even things like Uno and card games that you can play as a family.
That's right.
Things like my son taught himself to read because he was bad on Pokemon. And he wanted to be able to read what the name of the characters were. So it's tapping into that often that special interest as well.
That's it. And the great thing about Pokemon as well is that they've got those, it's got its unique number, hasn't it? Each Pokemon. So there's number and place value that comes in naturally there, which is quite nice.
It's like top trumps.
Yeah.
So, James, I'm guessing, and correct me if I'm wrong, that maths anxiety is probably quite unusual in very little children. So what might kind of be the factor in triggering this response in a young person?
Yeah, there's quite a few different factors that can come into play. So one is if you've had, negative or difficult or traumatic even experiences of maths before. So, I've talked to some adults that have maths anxiety and they've had a really bad experience in a classroom where they've been embarrassed or even humiliated in front of their peers, and that's really stuck with them over time, which is really sad to hear. But yeah, it can be even something as small as, if you're a child that's used to achieving well in maths, you consistently feel like I'm top of the class, I'm good at maths, but then, you get it wrong in front of everybody and you feel really embarrassed. That kind of thing can contribute to maths anxiety. You can be scared to make mistakes, and that can make you feel more stressed and anxious, and then you might make more mistakes, and then the cycle just kind of continues, which is quite sad.
With maths, it's quite definitive. There's an answer and it's right or it's wrong. So that perhaps puts quite a lot of pressure on these young people as well. And I think this idea of, being embarrassed, that's a real trigger, isn't it? Especially as children kind of get more aware of what their peers are thinking of them. Do you notice that there's an increase in when the children go to secondary school, or is that not sort of a factor in this?
It can be. I think perhaps, into teenagehood, you've got more of those kind of emotions and the kind of, puberty kicks in and all that kind of thing. And it can be quite tricky. But the transition from primary to secondary can be tricky in itself. And, you're used to having one teacher that knows you really well, and then you move towards having teachers that, you move around the different teachers throughout the day, don't you, often in secondary. So that kind of, you might not have necessarily a space where you feel as safe. So that might be a factor.
I'm also thinking often they stream maths in schools, don't they? So,
that's right.
And I'm a long time ago when I went to secondary school, but started off because I was a fairly academic child in the top set. Maths is not a strength of mine, so I gradually dropped down the sets. And I remember then having that feeling, well, I'm not very good at maths. So that kind of internal thinking as well, I'm not very good at maths. How do we help to sort of debunk or dispel that in children and explain to them that just because you find certain aspects of it difficult, that doesn't mean that you're not very good at the whole subject?
It is hard, isn't it? And like you say, it can really affect someone's self-esteem and confidence. They can feel, I'm not good at maths, or I'm not good at learning even. I think where we can make those links between the different areas of maths, that can really help, because, you know, a young person might be great at multiplying, or feel that they're great at multiplying, but they might not be able to do area yet. But actually making the link that actually it's the same kind of stuff, you're just doing it a bit differently, that can build their confidence for that new topic.
Maths anxiety, key indicators. If you believe your child is presenting with more persistent or severe problems with the subject, then there are a number of key indicators that could show that maths anxiety is the cause.
If you're listening right now and you're thinking, gosh, you know, I thought my kid didn't like maths, but now I'm thinking perhaps there might be something a little bit more there. What are the real key indicators that your child might be experiencing maths anxiety?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it is quite culturally acceptable to say I don't like maths, isn't it? For some of the reasons we talked about already today. And that's okay. It's okay for your child to not like maths at a particular time, and to voice that. I think that's a healthy thing. But where it becomes persistent, that can be something to kind of watch out for. So if it was, you know, let's say at a particular time in the day, you might put it down to, or maybe they're hungry, maybe they're tired. But if it's happening at different points in the day, if it's a persistent issue that happens over a long period of time, then it might be something you want to explore further. And it's that kind of fight or flight or freeze response as well. If you see that coming into play when you start talking about maths, or where you're just having a casual conversation about you know, money at the shop, for example, that's where you might think, oh, maybe there's some maths anxiety at play there.
And I guess as well, because, you know, as I said, we've talked about EBSA and school avoidance and challenges around accessing education. So in this example, would you be more likely to see it just primarily around maths? So the child might be comfortable going into school, they might be accessing the other subjects, but it's just this kind of spectre of maths that's making them feel really, really worried. Yeah,
it could be. I mean, let's say, you know, if your child struggles with their behaviour in the break time just before maths, they know that maths is coming, and they've been thinking about it all morning just quietly to themselves. Oh, I've got maths at 11 o'clock, and then they've got the break time, and it's just before maths. If that's a particular time where your child struggles in the day, it might not necessarily be, but it might be a sign that actually they are finding maths anxiety inducing at this time. It's important to add as well that it doesn't always have to be that way. Obviously, you know, over time, that anxiety can reduce. Your child might not always feel that way about maths. It's just how they feel right now.
Yeah.
I think that's helpful for parents to hear as well, because if you're a parent who is feeling anxious around maths, again, that doesn't always have to be the case. It can be, you know, worked on and improved over time.
If a child or a young person is suffering from anxiety, sometimes there can be some quite physical manifestations of this. Are you able to kind of describe some of these for me?
Yeah, I think it can be quite unique to each individual. So some young people may display very kind of outward signs of it in terms of their behaviour, kind of hitting or kicking or that kind of...
Bit of desk throwing.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. Some young people may become very withdrawn and reluctant to communicate, head on desk, that kind of thing. It can also have a lot of kind of physical symptoms, you know, tummy aches and headaches and that kind of, you know, nausea. So I think sometimes it can be helpful as a parent to kind of keep a log of those moments, so you can see, you know, my child felt ill on this time. Oh yeah, that's when we were doing maths homework, or when there was a big test coming up in maths the next day. So that can help to kind of analyse the trends. Is my child struggling with maths anxiety, or is it something else?
Yeah.
Maths anxiety and autism. Maths can be a complicated subject, and that's particularly true for neurodivergent children. Here's why young people with autism are more at risk of experiencing maths anxiety.
So what I'm kind of hearing you say is so much of it is around the approach, and that sort of traditional standing in front of the class, writing the maths equations on the boards. It is not going to work for actually quite a lot of children, but in particular we are talking about neurodivergent children. And why are autistic children perhaps more at risk of experiencing maths anxiety?
Yeah, it's a great question. There's a few different things that can come into play, I think. So one is the language around maths. So in maths, there's quite a lot of technical vocabulary that young people might not have come across before, which can be confusing. there also is in maths often words that mean something different in one context that they might have heard every day compared to in maths. So even, face, for example, how many faces does that shape have? Well, it doesn't have any. It's not got any eyes or a nose or a mouth, but, it does. It has faces. It's a 3D shape. So, and things like power as well, when you multiply them by a power, that means something different in everyday life.
Even squared.
Exactly, yeah. There's a lot there. And then another thing comes to mind of, words that sound similar but have different spellings. So for example, 8, the number 8, I ate my dinner, the number 8, it sounds very similar. And so there's lots of moments that can be confusing. Pie. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And for young people that interpret language very literally, that can cause quite a few difficulties and misunderstandings.
So James, what are the other difficulties or challenges that neurodivergent young people might find around maths?
Yeah, there's a few different other things at play. One is in terms of the emotional regulation side of things. If a young person is feeling stressed around maths, their stress bucket may be higher coming into the maths lesson or the homework task at home. And therefore something small may cause them to become dysregulated. So that's a factor at play as well. But often in maths, there's a lot to remember. You're thinking back to prior learning you did last week or last year, and if you find it hard to remember that stuff, you're trying to search around in your brain to activate that prior knowledge for the task that you're doing now, it can be quite stressful. So the working memory issues can come into play there as well.
Strategies for in the classroom. Next up, we hear why it can be difficult to find a learning strategy that works for a child struggling with maths anxiety. Let's see some examples of alternative methodologies that could help with engagement with maths.
In your experience, so if you were in a classroom and you had a child that was really, really struggling, they were feeling very, very anxious, they perhaps didn't want to come to maths lessons, what would be your sort of first port of call, the first thing you did to try and engage them and make them feel comfortable?
I think there's a few different things. I think, as I've mentioned already, just kind of taking the pressure off in any way that can be done. So, the teacher welcoming them into the classroom in a friendly, approachable way. Thinking about how maths can be linked to their own interests where possible. I think often where teachers can make maths hands-on and practical, that can really help a young person who's anxious around maths or who has different maths difficulties, because they can feel the maths, they can experience it, and it's not then something abstract. And that's something that autistic young people can find hard as well, because maths is often very abstract if it's presented in that way. But where we can make it concrete and then children can understand the concept better, they can go forward with more confidence then. So that's a real good approach. And then just taking the pressure off in any way that they can is really good. Perhaps, the teacher might have an agreed system with that child if they're starting to feel anxious around the maths that they're doing. Maybe it's an agreed hand signal or a timeout card or something that works for that child. A way for them to step out, take a breather and relax. And then come back when they're ready after an agreed amount of time. That can really help.
And that's giving the child a little bit of autonomy as well over their education too, because we do know that particularly autistic children feel quite out of control in academic settings a lot.
And then it's also thinking about the presentation of maths as a right or wrong subject as well. And I think often that's where teachers can really help, because where children feel like it's right or wrong, there is that intense pressure sometimes to get it right. But where maths can be open-ended and exploratory and fun, that can really make a difference. So an example that I often talk about is your times tables. It's facts you have to learn, and that can bring stress for adults and for children. But instead of saying, okay, what's 3 times 4? There's a right answer to find, isn't there? But, hey, how many different ways can we make 12? Let's get the resources out and figure it out together. You might have 3 or 4 different children with different answers, different ways of representing. You might have 6 cubes across and then 6 cubes across beneath that, or you might have 4 rows of 3, different ways of representing 12, and that can really take some pressure off.
And I like the idea of kind of practical ways of doing this. I can still remember a maths lesson at primary school where we were asked to fill the bath at home using buckets, so we could see how many litres of water went into the bath. And because it got the family involved, and we thought it was great fun, filling the bath with a bucket, it meant, I'm assuming it was about volume, but it meant that me and my brother were both interested to do it. So obviously you can't necessarily have children filling baths in the classroom, but it's ways of saying to them, think about how much water goes into a bath compared to a shower. There's lots of different ways of making it accessible for them. But it is about working with the individual child, working with their abilities and their interests, and trying to make something that is quite difficult seem a little bit less intimidating.
Homework, gaps, and maths at home. Because of the severity with which maths anxiety can present, it isn't an issue isolated to the classroom. It can also provide challenges at home. Here are some key stresses that can be present at home and what effect they can have.
So, James, we've talked a little bit about maths anxiety within the classroom and the kind of immediacy of that. But how does it impact these young people outside of the classroom as well?
Yeah, it can be tricky. I mean, the first example that comes to my mind is homework. So one of our children has homework, every week, and our youngest one doesn't yet, but I'm sure he will at some point. And when you've been at school all day, you've been really trying your best, you've been trying to be on top behaviour, and then you get home and you want to relax, and all of a sudden you have to do maths homework. It can be tricky. But in terms of day to day as well, you use maths a lot in day-to-day life. Like on the way here, for example, I had to plan my journey. I had to plan what time to set off to get here in time, and plan enough time for traffic and a coffee break. I had to think about, have I got enough money for the car park? So any interaction in everyday life that young people are having in relation to planning a journey to school, or saving up their pocket money for something they want to spend, all that involves maths. And if a young person is struggling with maths, they might avoid those areas, and it just makes it more tricky for them to be kind of ready for maths in everyday life in adulthood. Yeah.
You mentioned homework then. Now, homework is a bone of contention in many households. My son attends a school where they don't do homework, which is a huge relief, but is there something parents can do here? Because if you have a child or a young person who's incredibly anxious about their maths and their homework, and they really, because we know that particularly for autistic children, school is school, home is home. So to expect them to kind of keep going, I suppose, for want of a better term, when they get home and do something that they find very difficult, is there an argument for parents to speak to the school about this? Can schools be accommodating? Is there an answer, James?
Yeah, there's a few things to try. I think in the first instance, what we try and do at home is, again, like in the classroom, take the pressure off as much as possible. So we pick a time for homework in the week where, it's not after school, where there's lots of,
Lots of
tiredness from the day.
and...
Exactly, yeah. There's no hurry. We usually do Saturday morning, so wake up, have a nice leisurely breakfast, chill out for a bit, and then we've got a bit of homework to do. Let's do that now. Get it out the way, and take as much of the pressure off around it as possible. And not any kind of time limit, or and if that's not the right time that day, we can do it at a different time. That's fine. So yeah, that's how we kind of think about homework in our house. So yeah, finding the right time for homework to happen in the week, where it best suits the child. But yeah, absolutely, it's always worth talking to school. I think that open dialogue with school can be really helpful, because it's important to remember that the things that you see at home might not be what the school sees in the classroom. They might see a child that presents very differently. Maybe they don't appear to struggle with maths, but that actually they do. They show you in different ways when they're at home. So yeah, if there's any kind of issues, even in the early stages, I'd suggest talking to school first, and seeing whether there's any accommodations they can make. Perhaps they can reduce the frequency of the homework, or change it a little bit to suit that child's needs. It's definitely worth a conversation. I think schools don't always, they've got to think about the whole school approach and perceived fairness and that kind of thing, but it's definitely worth a conversation.
Because I'm also thinking that if, it becomes a battleground at home. Yeah. And as a parent of autistic children, I know that you kind of pick your battles, yes. Right? And you don't want home to become a place where they feel anxious. And I think particularly around the core subjects, and I'm thinking particularly around secondary school here, there is an enormous amount of pressure on schools as well. We appreciate that schools are under pressure. And these young people, if they don't do their homework, there are consequences. And then, then they become more sort of stuck in that, I can't do this. Yeah. And I'm also thinking as well, if you miss quite a key part of maths, if there's and I know even primary school, there's some really fundamental parts early on, aren't there, that if you don't quite get hold of those bits, it's very difficult to fill the gaps. So if you are a parent listening and you're thinking, my child, we've covered EBSA on this podcast before, you might have had a child that's been out of school or unable to access a curriculum. How worried should parents be if they think their child has a missing gap in their maths knowledge, and how can they fix it?
It's tricky, because if we get too worried about it, then it'll cause us to be anxious, won't it, as parents? And I know from my experience, sometimes I have to, take a moment myself and regulate before and come back to the homework later. So I think, let's not get too worried about any gaps. I think, hopefully the teacher would be helping the child to work on those in the classroom. And ideally, homework wouldn't be new stuff. It would be stuff that they have been working on already in school. But yeah, I do think having a conversation with school around homework can be really useful.
Exam support and alternative routes. Exams and assessments can already be a source of major stress and anxiety for children, irrespective of maths anxiety. We explore what resources are there for students struggling with this and how to access the aids available to help pupils.
So one of the really kind of anxiety-inducing experiences is probably sitting GCSEs. You think about this from a neurodivergent person's perspective. You're going into a hall, you've got to sit very quietly, you've got to sit very still, you've got to do this big test, the rest of the country's doing this test. And there's a feeling that if you don't pass, that's the end of it, and you won't get a great job, you won't have the qualifications that you need. And actually there are alternative ways to get maths qualifications. I know that Options Autism offer functional skills, which is a really great way of getting that qualification, which can lead to college. And in the future, of course, you can do your GCSE whenever you like. I could do one now if I wanted to.
Yeah, there's lots of alternatives available, and different timescales. Everyone should feel that they can progress at their own pace rather than what they consider to be the right way, the only way. But actually it's not. People can take longer to get to that GCSE point if they want to, or they can do those alternative qualifications like functional skills. It's just about what's helping your child to get to the end point, the next point in their journey that they want to get to, isn't it? I think even for children that are doing GCSEs at what might be considered the expected time, there's a lot that parents can do to support them though. Again, that conversation with school, hopefully earlier on in the journey, you'd have had that conversation already about maths and about their needs and so on. And there's a lot of access arrangements that can be put into place for exams. If your young person needs, a scribe or extra time, they need to do the exam in a smaller room. Sometimes that can happen. It depends on lots of different factors, but it's worth exploring. But yeah, reassuring your child as well that this isn't the only chance to get it right. The whole future doesn't depend on this moment. They can resit, or they can do alternatives. And it's about praising their effort as well. If they've tried their best to prepare for the exam and it doesn't quite go to plan, that's okay. They've done the best that they can, and that's fine.
That's really lovely, actually, that idea of them doing their best. And I say to my kids, it's not that you've got to do the best you ever possibly can. It's the best you can do in that moment on the day.
That's it.
And I think giving parents the knowledge, many parents won't know that that's an option, to speak to the school and say, my child is really struggling. Can you offer them a quiet room? Can somebody sit with them? Because like you say, it might not be possible, but if you don't ask, then it's certainly not going to be possible, is it?
That's it. And that comes as well with having that good relationship with the SENCO, because it's typically the SENCO that would sort out the access arrangements in conjunction with, senior leaders within the school. But having that ongoing relationship and dialogue over time, it makes it easier just to have that conversation, because you've already had the conversation for many years leading up to that point, hopefully.
Yeah, and that's a kind of key point about relationships, isn't it? And not everybody has an amazing relationship with their child's school, but if you can keep the lines of communication open and work sort of together as a team, I know from personal experience that makes everything far less stressful and anxiety inducing. Can I just ask you, would a child have to have a formal diagnosis or an EHCP in order to get additional support?
Not necessarily. It does make the process slightly easier if they have got an EHCP, but there's a couple of alternative ways that it can happen. It just means that someone has to fill in a different form, and they have to use different ways of getting that assessment.
But that would be interesting for parents to know, because there might be parents thinking, well, my child, I haven't managed to get the EHCP yet, or I'm in this long waiting list for a diagnosis, but the exams are coming up. Can I still get help? And I suppose the answer there is yes, but you need to ask for it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And a good place that might be helpful for parents and carers to look at is an organisation called JCQ, and they have a really good guide, which is intended for school-based staff, but it's if you type in JCQ access arrangements onto Google or any other search engine, it should come up, and it's very long and detailed, but it does give an overview of the kind of access arrangements that can be possible and how that might be assessed.
Help for parents. The barriers created by maths anxiety can last for a long time and can be prevalent not just in children but adults too. Support with maths anxiety isn't solely reserved for pupils. Parents can also inquire about such help and reassurance, and we're going to discuss what some of these options are.
And often if you have a parent, i.e. me, who struggles with maths themselves, that can become a barrier too, because my daughter's in year 3 and I look at the maths workbook and I think, I don't know how to do this, because the way of teaching has changed, and also it's something I struggled with myself. So for parents themselves, I'm guessing there's an element of anxiety for them, because they don't want to feel that they are letting their child down by not being able to support them. But if they are struggling to access it as well, then that's a kind of double barrier, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And so it's something I hear a lot is, the maths today is different than
Yeah.
it was when I was at school. And, it's the case for me as well. But there's a lot that can be done about that as well. Schools often have what's called a calculation policy, which sets out the expected kind of methods for each year group within the school. And that's to ensure consistency, because maths builds on what came before it, doesn't it? And so it might say for pupils working at reception, this is the methods we should use. In year 1, this is the methods we should use. Pupils working at year 2, etc. So in that ongoing conversation with school, you could even ask, have you got a copy of the calculation policy, just to equip you as a parent with the kind of understanding of what school is teaching. And then if you're not sure, you can even ask the teacher if there's any support they can offer, or, is there a video they would recommend on YouTube for how to do that particular calculation. And then you can make sure as a parent that if you're able to, using the same kind of approach, which then helps your child because it's that consistent message. There's not one message from home, one message from school. There's confusion there. Having said that, it can be sometimes helpful to allow a young person to use the method that they want to. If they know a method and they're confident with it, and then actually they're being told to use a completely different method that doesn't make sense to them, sometimes it can be helpful to give them that choice of the method that they prefer. So that's one thing that can be done is having a look at a calculation policy, or asking the teacher, are there any videos that you can recommend?
I'm thinking now when my youngest daughter started primary school, we were actually invited in, the parents, and they sort of talked about literacy and numeracy and how they were going to be teaching it. And I think that's another thing, isn't it? If you feel that you can speak to the teachers at the school and be honest, look, maths is not my strong point. I'm struggling here. Can you give me some tips or ideas so that I can get better and help my child? You mentioned YouTube as well. And actually, as you said, I thought, God, that's a brilliant idea, because most parents have a love-hate relationship with YouTube. But if there's some very good educational stuff out there, and there's some presenters who perhaps will tailor their learnings towards neurodivergent children. So perhaps that's an option as well, is to kind of speak to the school, have a look, see if there's some accessible, kind of fun, cool young YouTubers who want to talk about maths. Yeah. I'm sure there must be some out there. And I think it's also kind of important that we mention that this isn't the end of the world. If your child is struggling and they're really, really finding maths challenging, it doesn't mean that you have failed. It doesn't mean that they are going to fail. It doesn't mean their outcomes are going to be less. Is there some pearls of wisdom perhaps that you could give to parents who maybe are listening and thinking, I'm really feeling seen by this episode?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the first thing to say, that as a parent myself, parenting is hard. It's great, but it's hard. And so it's really important to be kind to yourself. I think, if your child is struggling with maths anxiety or any sort of maths difficulties, it's not your fault. It's just the way things are right now. And it doesn't mean that it won't change over time as well. Some maths difficulties can be quite persistent over time, but even in that case, the effects can be reduced. There's a lot that can be done by school and at home. But I guess the main thing would be to be kind to yourself. Especially if maths is quite triggering for you. Be kind to yourself, reach out for support. It's okay. It's good to talk about it.
It is. And I think that's a really powerful thing to say as well, is to acknowledge it, just to say we are struggling. Me, my children, we're struggling with maths, and to reach out for support, because there is a lot out there. It's just knowing where to look. And we will put some links to support in the show notes for this podcast as well.
Yeah, brilliant.
Practical resources. The traditional manner of writing on a board and speaking directly to the class does not work for everyone. Here are some examples of practical methods that teachers and parents can use as an alternative to help encourage engagement with maths.
So, James, what sort of practical at home or in the classroom resources can we use?
Yeah, so any ways of making maths practical can really help. You don't have to be a kind of maths specialist to do that. There's lots of things that parents would likely have lying around at home that might be useful. But a couple of things that I typically recommend to the Options Autism schools. I've got a couple of things with me.
Lovely, show us.
So I really like these multi-link cubes, and what you can do is you can put them together. They kind of link together on all sides, so you can represent loads of different math stuff with them. So I've represented 16 here, so that could be used for area, for perimeter. It could be used for multiplication, square numbers. Even square numbers is quite an abstract one sometimes, of where, what does that even mean? Yeah. But and so the kind of 4 rows of 4 cubes, it sets out that 16 is a square number. You've got 16 cubes, you put them in a square, and actually what's the next square number? Well, if you add the fifth row and kind of make it 5 times 5, then you can see. So any ways in which you can make maths practical can really help. And I've got another example as well.
Well, James, I'm smiling here because, I'm 44 years old and I don't think I've ever made the connection that a square number is a square.
It's strange, isn't it? You don't until you see it practically. And even algebra, you can represent algebra with these kind of resources as well.
Quite sensory as well, quite nice
absolutely.
sensory toys.
And this is another one here. I've got Numicon, which is really good. And you can do stuff like number bonds to 10. So you've got your 7 piece and your 3 piece, and you can put them together to make 10. But you can do adding, subtracting, division, rounding even. But simply the odd and even numbers, like what's an odd number? Going back to language, odd. Oh yeah, it's an unusual number, isn't it? It's odd.
Yeah.
But actually, the fact that it's not straight on the end, it shows you that it's an odd number. And then put it together, you've got 10 here, and you can see that 10 is even because it's got that even edge there. So you can do lots with these resources, and it's really interesting because, to be completely honest, in my role I've learned lots of this as I've been going along. Lots of YouTube videos, lots of things that parents can do to upskill themselves. You don't have to be necessarily a maths expert to have a go.
I really like that real visual representation. I think it just, we saw it happen in real time, didn't we? I learned some maths on the podcast. And often for our neurodivergent young people, there's a real pleasure in the sort of sensory feedback and the tactile feeling of objects.
Absolutely. And it's not only does it make the maths concrete and therefore easier to understand, but the feel of the pieces, you can feel the number and what it represents, but it just feels nice, doesn't it? Something to fidget with as well to help the young person to keep attention. But there's lots you can do in terms of combining these kind of things with Play-Doh, with sand, with a tough tray, with flour, or all sorts of things you can combine these resources with to make them fun and engaging for young people that really like that sensory play. Maths at home doesn't have to be working through a worksheet that's been sent from school. It can be, filling a touch tray with sand or anything and getting some of these resources out, or even just stuff you have lying around at home and printing
buttons.
with them.
I used to love buttons when I was little.
And how can you arrange buttons? If you're practicing the 3 times table, can you arrange the buttons in 3s, 3, 6, 9, 12, etc. in the tough tray, in the sand? Lots you can do.
I'm also thinking as well that traditionally we perhaps would view these sorts of resources as for younger children. And I suppose that's something that we perhaps need to readdress and think, actually, older children can get exactly the same sort of response and reward from these tangible objects. I think perhaps we associate these sort of learning aids with younger children. But of course, older children can get such a benefit from them as well. So perhaps it's rethinking how we utilise the learning aids in classrooms and at home as well.
Absolutely, because it can become a thing where if children are using these in class, they might think, oh, these are for people that struggle with maths, or for younger children. But if everyone uses it, then it's just a thing that happens in the school, and therefore it's more, there's less of that preconception there. But there's lots of benefits for older learners. Everybody, I believe, should have access to concrete resources in maths. So there's an approach that I typically talk about in my role, which is concrete pictorial abstract. So you start off with the concrete representation.
And that would be something like the blocks,
like these manipulatives, these Numicon pieces that I've mentioned, and then you would move on to a picture of it when a young person is ready, and then in the end you might move on to just numbers if that young person wants to. But by that point they've got that secure mental image in their head of what the maths is that they've been working on already. But even with older learners, I always say that they should have, if they've moved on to the abstract stage of math, they should still have the resources to hand. They should be able to go back to the pictorial or back to the concrete, get the resources out. If they're confused about something, let's get the tray of multi-link cubes out and figure out what's going on.
And sort of taking the stigma away a bit as well by making it something that's available to all children.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And it's interesting because even sometimes I need to get them out myself when I'm working with children, or I might get a mini whiteboard out and draw what's going on, especially like a worded problem where you've got so many words, you're trying to figure out what is actually going on here. Drawing a diagram of it as an adult really helps, I think. So modelling that to the children, whether it's your own children or whether it's a teacher in school, can really help.
And I think there's that divide, isn't there? You either do it on a calculator or you do it in your head. And actually it's reminding people that there is a middle ground.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And thinking about, an autistic individual might find it hard in terms of that working memory type stuff that we've mentioned already. Taking away that pressure that you've got to do it in your head, or if they find a calculator confusing, there's different ways to work out the maths and different ways that they can do it.
And what would you say, let's say my son, who might say about maths, why do I need to do maths? I've got a calculator.
Yeah.
What would you counter with that?
It's a great question. To be able to use a calculator, you've still got to be able to understand the maths.
Very true.
You know, if you're in a shop and you're working out, you know, you've got a specific budget and you've got this thing over there that's 20% off, this thing that's 3 for 2,
Yes.
this thing that's, you know, 50% off, all those kind of deals that you come across. You've got to be able to understand what's going on and think about what's the best value. And so to manage a budget well, you have to understand the maths that's going on. Having a calculator helps. It can help you with the working out, but you've still got to understand what is at play to help you make the best decisions. And, you know, things like reading a bus timetable, a calculator doesn't help too much with that. There's lots of maths that we need without a calculator also.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And you know, going back to the kind of the old example of your change in a shop, if you want to make sure you've been given the right change, you can't whack out your calculator, can you?
Absolutely.
There and then?
Yeah. Or if your phone runs out of battery, because our calculators are on our phones, aren't they, usually?
Of course.
Then, you know, we've got to have a plan B.
Yeah, definitely. James, thank you so much for joining us today and unpacking a topic that so many families feel alone with. Maths anxiety can feel huge for families, for children and the parents, but with the right understanding, the right scaffolding and the small everyday strategies, we absolutely can change a child's relationship with maths for the better. If you would like to explore this further, we'll include links to resources in the show notes. And as always, if you've got any questions about autism, education or support, you can get in touch with the team at Options Autism or visit us at optionsautism.co.uk.